Okay, I think we're going to start this webinar. Can I see some thumbs to effect of hearing my voice? Thank you. With that, let me just first outline some parameters of the format. We've asked everybody to have their microphones on mute until such time they're eventually called on to provide their comments. Today's webinar, organized by UNDP, was initiated from discussions pertaining to the leadership transition at IEO. Imran Naidu's very last day in the function of IEO director is today. As of tomorrow, Oscar Garcia will be head of the office. I will ask Oscar to be available down the road of this webinar to give some summative, reflective and forward-looking remarks. Meanwhile, we have compiled a small list of speakers from the UNEG community. We have today online 109 colleagues. I'm not going to go through all the agencies that are present, other than saying that my list runs to 25 agencies present at this moment. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome our speakers to give us an overview of their initial reflections on how we as an evaluation profession are able to adapt to and respond to the crisis that we have at the moment and implications going forward. We have Imran Naidu, Director of IEO, is going to speak first, followed by Guy Tees of the ILO, talking about work planning, implications for that. Followed by Carlos Carajana from the Food and Agriculture Organization, as well as Fumika Auchi, who's going to talk about the composition of teams, implications for that. And then lastly, we have Monica Sikusuka from the World Health Organization, who's going to be talking about remote data collection. These are just some of the inroads with many aspects to facets to this crisis, and it's going to be an ongoing discussion for quite some time. But with that, no further ado, Imran, will you give some initial reflections? Imran Naidu.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues across the globe. Thank you for responding so enthusiastically to this initiative. I must start off by saying that this is really an initiative of the IEO Director Incumbent, Mr. Oscar Garcia, who, as part of the transition, brought up this idea several weeks back and thought it was very opportune that a seminar or session be held on the subject. And it became more relevant now that we are all sitting in the crisis. So this could not be more topical. I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate and wish Oscar Garcia all the best in his new tenure. He is known to all of us, and I'm sure he'll do a remarkable job, and we appreciate the good work that he's done in IFAD. And I'm sure the collaboration will continue from the colleagues around here, all of whom are at UNEG. So I've been told, and I know Harold chairs quite tightly as far as time goes, that I have 6 minutes. Is that correct, Harold? So I will go through the document that we sent out, which was developed by the IEO. Several colleagues made an input. But in essence, it's the evaluation during crisis, COVID-19, has propelled us into a very rapid modality where we have to start thinking differently as evaluators. At the very broad overarching level, the point of waiting for several months, almost a year, before we have an evaluation, to take it to a governance board and then wait for it to respond and then to follow up on recommendations for several months thereafter, those days are over. We are in a situation where, in order to retain our edge and to demonstrate our relevance, we have to, one, adopt to the fast-moving context, and secondly, to use new forms of communication and technology to be able to conduct our work still in a manner that is credible. So matters of rapid reviews, assessments, almost in-time feedback will now become much more important, much more profiled, and of course, evaluation, the longer type, while it will continue, is going to move to the back burner in an extent. The piece that we put together goes along what we consider to 6 broad areas to frame the discussion. The first, which all of us are doing right now, is the rethinking evaluation plans. While we have a 4-year costed program of work and we have these plans, the plans are engaged, as we know, with the program countries. The program countries have new priorities right now and everything's been put on hold or reformulated. So the classic evaluation plans absolutely need rethink. And that means it has to be pitched to the governments and the stakeholders who need information that is more relevant to the now. And that is going to be quite a large exercise that everyone is going to do. But in the rethinking of the plan, we also would have to rethink the methodology. The classic methodology of us physically being on the ground, getting data, conducting interviews, many would have to be translated almost immediately into a more virtual format. We are used to the virtual at the point of the debrief. The virtual will now come in even at the point of the conduct. Okay. And that means the question of modernizing the approaches becomes extremely critical. The second part is that the configuration of teams need to be rethought. We still have to engage with teams that are at the country level because it does bring to us a certain element of legitimacy and authenticity. But whereas we have been using people who are traditional evaluators, we may want to think of how do we draw in the academia and the academic and the research sector who have already been working in each of the countries on the area of remote data collection. And that means also looking at expertise around geographic information systems. I know work has been done on information. Oscars, I had a book recently. Yua and I also did some work in terms of the question of scale, because remote information, remote sensing data does become important to provide the more instantaneous information. We may not be totally geared in our units to deal with this, but that's a skill level that has to come in quite quickly. The third element in terms of the data collection, as evaluators, we all believe, rightfully so, that being at the coalface and getting the sense of the variation is important for us to make sense of the knowledge that is there in order to feedback. And that is almost part of our DNA. We are different in that we do not take kindly to what we would call as armchair research. However, the reality of the situation which prevents us for a time that we don't know means that we would have to rethink the entire modality of data collection. And in our little flyer, we talk about the various platforms and how do we engage. We're fortunate that in this crisis in the history of the world, we have good connectivity. And what it means that this connectivity is now going to go to the next level, because how do we use this connectivity in order to gather information? But also not to be romantic and assume that everything can be sorted out by big data, by geographic information systems, by remote sensing. Because in essence, whatever work we do has a strong people dimension. And if we move too much into the domain of the IT and technology, we may lose that very important element of human connect with what is going on in the ground. The fourth element that we highlight is the engaging stakeholders virtually. In the last few weeks, the IEO has managed to actually debrief many of its country program evaluations virtually. In fact, the last one was the complete virtual. And that was a process that we've actually been doing for quite a few years now. But in the debriefing remotely, we are also meaning that we are engaging with the formal. Do the informal, the actual beneficiaries on the ground, do they have the technology to engage with us on the results? is something we really need to think about, because a danger could be that we could get very bureaucratized, and it could actually lead to a further level of inequality, that the people we engage with are those that are technologically connected, when in many of the communities that we work, if they are ultimately the beneficiaries, they may not have the access to the high-speed internet and other forms of connectivity. Something just to think about as we move into the virtual, and we don't forget the actual, as I would say, the voices on the ground. The penultimate element of this part is to share evaluations globally. The almost 90 people that are online right now is an outcome of the fact that we have a crisis. We have this very good turnout. And that means more and more evaluators, instead of working in their silos, which we rightfully do because you report to the board, would now have to work more horizontally than vertically. That means that the turf battles, the boundaries that come about in terms of mandate would have to be rethought. This involves a greater part of collaboration and working collectively. I'm looking at Carlos over there, and we had approved we had worked on the strategic plan for UNEG, and that would also need a revisit as you move ahead, so that part of that the strategic plan does reflect this new reality, and that would also reflect in all the new policies. So I think the global part is pretty much amazing. Global is often considered the time when we go to an international evaluation conference and meet colleagues. As we know, many of these have just been put on hold. There's going to be a lot more virtual, and this is, I do believe that it's going to bring people together more than traditionally would have happened, because one is almost forced into the, as you would say, into the virtual meeting room. And finally, the connection with networks. The UNEG network has been quite amazing, and I've learned a lot and appreciated it. But it is a UNEG network. There are other networks that this constituency has not engaged with adequately. And this is a great opportunity for that engagement. And in engaging with the networks, one would also learn methodologically how the evaluation colleagues in these forums use the opportunity to actually recast and reformulate their work. I thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you again for the vision and insight, Oscar, on this opportune moment. And whilst I will step off a seat today, and Oscar takes over formally tomorrow, I will watch from afar the developments of UNEG. It's an amazing professional network. I know we have engaged and debated rigorously. It's produced a lot of work, and most certainly this is an opportunity for it to take the profession even further. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Imran. We will get a chance to do a wave to you before the end of this meeting as well. Colleagues, we have online at this webinar at the moment, we have UNESCO, UNICEF, WIPO, OIOS, UNIDO, FAO, ILO, UNITAR, UNCDF, UNRWA, International Maritime Organization, UNAIDS, OHCHR, UNFPA, UN Women, UNEP, IFAD, and IOM. There will be a chance. The purpose of the meeting is to share experience, and we will wish to have questions and answers and other reflections. I don't think there's anyone who claims to have all the answers on the path forward, but as a further input to discussion, next I'd like to call on Guy Teese, Director of Evaluation at ILO, who will give his reflections on some of their work they've been undertaking. After that, depending on time, we'll do one round for reflections and comments. Guy, are you ready for us?
Yes, I am, and thank you. I think Imran actually said it all, so there will be little to add, but still I will make an effort. But I want to thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a great initiative. I hope everybody's in good health and spirit. I think it's very important we stress that, and that we show that we care about our colleagues. Now, the current COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has severely affected evaluation work, and will continue to do so for months to come. We in the Evaluation Office in ILO have quite a large evaluation portfolio to cover. We undertake about 60 evaluations per year, 95% of them are decentralized, while the remaining 5% are directly undertaken by the evaluation office. But the decentralized evaluations are done by a network of regional evaluation officers, certified evaluation managers, consultants, and crucially, we as the evaluation office in Geneva provide full real-time oversight and maintain quality control and accountability for the outputs. And it's for that reason, of course, that we are very concerned about the work planning and how we keep this whole machinery running. Now, we started to review our planning quite a while ago. I would say even 2 weeks ago, we started to look at the various issues that came in. Our system is fully online through IEO of Discovery, and we have an online platform that shows all the planned evaluations that are to take place in a given quarter of a year. And we had, before that, had discussions also about the fact that all these evaluations, of course, involved a lot of travel, and had looked at options on how we could reduce travel, both because of budgetary constraints, but also, of course, because of environmental concerns. And now with the need for teleworking and restriction on travel, of course, it was important that we came up with some kind of guidance for our colleagues on how to go about this. Now, I must stress that while this note is detailed, it is very operational in nature, focuses on the how and the what, and it does not yet take into account the issues that Indram pointed out, that we need to look also down the road how we will adjust our evaluation methods to reflect how the crisis affects the performance of the projects, how we can take that into account in our evaluations, approaches and questions and so on. Now, our guidance note, and I think that was something that was quite helpful, uses a risk matrix with the x-axis showing constraints and risks from low, medium to high, and the y-axis the criticality of the evaluations to ILO's mission. And that allowed us to come up with 9 key scenarios on how to conduct decentralized evaluations that range from business as usual to completely remotely. And actually, in some cases, completely to cancel the whole exercise. Within those scenarios, reliance on online methods, of course, and the use of national consultants to conduct fieldwork are crucial. And I can already say now that the scenario of business as usual is a window that very quickly closed, and that there are no countries anymore where we can apply that scenario. Now, in terms of the 2 key, I would say, variables, constraints and limitations relate to travel restrictions, connectivity issues for online data gathering, but most of all, the absence of contact lists. What we've noticed is that many of our offices do not have contact lists that we can use for our remote work. The definitions for mission critical, we looked at the importance of a timely evaluation and its results to the continuity of ILO activities, inputs into critical decisions to support the continuation of projects, and inputs into critical governance documents. Now, if you then look at the scenarios that we came up with, you can see that, and I've shared this note with a selected few people, with all the UNEG heads and with colleagues who asked for it by email, because we don't want to put it online. It's a living document and we adjust it as time goes along. One thing that I need to stress is that any strategy for adaptation must include, of course, a review of the constraints as measured against importance, deadlines, timelines, including the implications of a possible backlog of evaluations when you reschedule. Now, in our case, with 60 evaluations due, when we create this backlog, it becomes nearly impossible next year to get the work done, and we would quickly run into trouble. We also have to, of course, see that the conditions to be achieved for adaptation are acceptable. Not all countries will be able to go through this adaptation of approaches. Also, the resources needed to carry out the planned adaptation, because there will be possibly extra costs involved. We also looked into the possibility of clustering evaluations, because if we, within a certain country, need to undertake various project evaluations, we might be able to cluster them and thereby undertake fewer interactions between evaluators and stakeholders. We also insist that whenever an evaluation is to be rescheduled or cancelled, that is done in consultation with the evaluation office. And finally, in terms of the strategy, an assessment needs to be undertaken to ascertain that an adaptation will not compromise quality standards for the type of evaluation and whether it will still lead to a credible evaluation, because there is a big risk when we go to these remote methods that the quality of the evaluation will really suffer. Now, while I was reluctant to participate initially when Adil asked me, because I felt that our experience was still limited and that most of us have developed, of course, guidance notes, and our guidance note is not very different from all the others. I must say by now, of course, we already have some experience. This morning I spent a lot of time discussing with various teams out there in the field, the problems that they are facing. And I can possibly go over a few of the problems. What we have seen is that engagement with our officers, and I mean with that our country officers that ensure the continuation of projects, is going to be more intense with this new method. And they are already overwhelmed. There is a serious risk, in my opinion, that evaluations are considered by some of them as an unnecessary burden now. And if we're not careful, this can damage the evaluation culture that we have built up over the years. Also, the use of online methods requires, as I said before, a robust database with contact details of constituents and stakeholders. While we have that for most of our government agencies, workers and employers organizations, that is less the case for the beneficiaries, of course, and the other stakeholders that are really out there in the field. Also, while we have a good network with national consultants, we see a growing demand for national consultants. And of course, the domestic travel restrictions make it also nearly impossible for them to undertake the work. Another few points that we have basically in practical terms come across is that it's very important that when you do your terms of reference that you of course include the need to adjust the methodology and that you also allow for some flexibility in the inception report. When it comes to setting up virtual interviews, that we prepare and document everything as much as possible in advance to ensure that the teams do not run into too many delays. Also that when we use national consultants, the level of effort to brief those consultants to apply those new methods is going to take some more time. And I think those are some of the main lessons. I think I want to keep it to that in terms of the lessons we have learned when it comes to undertaking the evaluations as we go along. When we will be later down the road and facing evaluations of projects that have gone through the crisis and have obviously faced problems, we will need to ask ourselves the questions where the monitoring of data is still on track. Is the monitoring data being collected sufficiently and of good enough quality to be useful for evaluations, whether they are done now, scheduled, or in the future. So there may be a need for new monitoring data to be collected. Also, once projects are back to some form of normal operations, we may need to look at how the problems they have faced have affected evaluability, from changes in the planned outcomes in terms of response to the crisis, the changed environment, focus in national priorities, and so on. In terms of concrete proposal that I would like to leave for your consideration, we may want to think about a new evaluability tool to look at bigger programs to see to what extent we can use that for the new situation. Now, as a context-driven guidance note, of course, pragmatism and common sense will need to prevail. It is necessary to always keep in mind that, of course, formal UN policy on travel and risks takes priority for staff, international and national consultants, and of course, most of all, the beneficiaries and people we are supposed to serve. I stop there, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Guy. Indeed, when you raise evaluability assessment, it's clear that the COVID response as a subject itself is going to emerge to be a priority in many of our organizations, certainly far beyond those who have from the outset dealt with the health sector. This thing is moving fast, and it has implications on many fronts, both for our short-term actions as well as our long-term actions. Now, I'm sure there are many people who have thoughts arising, reflections to share, but in the spirit of the program, I suggest we run with the speakers that we have flagged from the outset. I will ask Fumika and Carlos to give their reflections on implications for how we compose our evaluation teams. Fumika, is it you or is it Carlos going to start? How are you doing?
Yes, I will start. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and I hope really you're all well. Carlos and I have just 2 slides to show you, so let me just go to the screen. Okay, so we have put together just 2 slides on the subject of evaluation design and team. And these are really stemming from our own internal conversations within our respective office as to how we go about conducting our evaluations during the time of crisis. At the UNDP IEO, as Indran earlier mentioned, we have a lot of work, of course, a big volume of work plan, including over 20 or close to 30 country program evaluations, and then also thematic evaluations. But in the last few months, we're really feeling the effects of the crisis, not just because of the travel restrictions or bans, but then because we're getting less and less engagement with our country office staff or national government and people that we work with. And so we really started feeling this. And we have met internally a number of times among ourselves how we go about carrying on with our work. So let me just go to the first slide. I hope you can see. So the first question that we asked was, the first question that we asked was, once the work plan, as Guy was discussing, work plan is set, and then how do we go about carrying out actual data collection and analysis without going on an mission? Okay.
May I remind all to mute microphones?
Yeah, okay. So to us, this question really became the question about how do we maximize non-mission activities during our evaluation. And then there are several alternatives, options that came up during our discussions, and then also associated issues and risks. The first issue that came up was, when we think about doing evaluation without going on a mission, was that let's use national consultants. They're valuable, they know everything about local context issues, and then they have better access to the people, the stakeholders that we're interested in. But as the recent UNEG discussion indicated, we really want to make sure that we do not put them in harm's way. And so we really have to think about, we have to give ethical consideration to this, recruiting a national consultants in a case of crisis. Administratively, we are seeing more and more tendencies for direct contracting, which is not necessarily a good thing, but then it seems to be the practice that is growing. And then also at the UNDP, we have recently added a clause in the consultant terms of reference or contract, anticipating the potential disruptions in their work. So we have added one clause in the document. How do we address them when the consultants are working in the middle of this crisis? In terms of non-mission activities, there are other items raised, including the fact that we can focus more on desk reviews, ensuring that the quality, quantity of documentation is there. And then also we could explore more non-traditional data sources, information sources such as satellite imagery and social media. These are also mentioned earlier, but the more and more use of online modalities for interviews and meetings, the use of surveys, questionnaires, these are something that we also discussed among ourselves. But then at the same time, we really want to make sure that there's a sufficient technical infrastructure, connectivity at the recipient sides, whether it's our country office teams, the people we work with, or the government, UN, the donors and beneficiary groups and so forth. And want to make sure that their physical availability and psychological readiness, receptiveness to our evaluation because right now, as many of our country office colleagues are working on the crisis mode, and their program has changed, and evaluation necessarily may not be of their first priority. In adjusting our approach to conducting an evaluation, we also want to examine the overall skill set among the evaluation team. What kind of skill set do we want in our team? For example, at the UNDP, as we put more and more emphasis on doing desk reviews, with different types of material, the documentation, we're putting more and more effort on research capabilities. I'm going to ask Carlos to come in and then talk a little bit on this.
Yes, thank you, Fumika, and good morning, afternoon to everyone. It is a real pleasure to be part of this webinar. Following Fumika's presentation, I would like to offer some additional tips from our experience in FAO. For instance, when working with national consultants, you still need to think and to keep in mind that this coronavirus crisis is affecting everybody, the local offices, our counterparts, and also the consultants themselves. So we should not expect them, therefore, to carry out with business as usual. No? We need to be clear on the topics and on the people they need to focus for the assessment we are recruiting them. And there is indeed a heavy burden in all. No? So if you are going ahead with an evaluation, it probably means that that evaluation is really important to everybody. So try to share the burden with those involved. No? For example, we can, for agencies that have country offices, we can make a greater use of their capacities to provide support and with logistics, or maybe even with documentation for the desk reviews. And on the use of remote surveys, there are a few risks and issues indeed, but there is also a major opportunity cost. If they can allow you to reach more partners and beneficiaries in a way that also respects their availability and doesn't conflict also with their interest to contribute to exercise, I think the surveys can be probably one of the tools we can use more in this situation. They can also provide insights and quantitative information on the program under evaluation, which can also be very useful for triangulation. Thank you. Fumika, over to you. Fumika, yeah, good. Yeah.
Yes, okay, I'm muted, right? Okay. So let us go to the second slide we wanted to show you. Not necessarily about the team itself, but when we were thinking about how we respond to this crisis as an evaluation office, yes, we need to be flexible in terms of adjusting the scope design of our evaluation in terms of in a time of this crisis. But the question is, when we have a very, very limited stakeholder engagement, we're not being able to communicate engage well with the country offices, government, the national counterparts, beneficiary groups. And then the question really becomes, what is the purpose of our evaluation? We have to ask ourselves a very hard question. What is the purpose of our evaluation? What is the utility of our evaluation? And then that means that we may have to have a courage to actually reprioritize our evaluation plan, which goes back to the first item of the webinar. But there's really an opportunity to reprioritize what we do as an office. And particularly, we may be able to do more knowledge lesson learning pieces, which we always wanted to do, but we were always busy and not being able to do, and then do more of knowledge sort of related activities. Here's a couple of examples from our own UNDP evaluation office that when we brainstormed this, is that perhaps we could do more synthesis work. Particularly our evaluations in Africa region is very weak, and then we want to do maybe some kind of synthesis based on all the evaluations that we have conducted in the past. We can maybe revisit our own methodology on country program or thematic evaluation, or perhaps given this crisis, maybe this is an opportunity for us to do a real-time evaluation of our agency's response to the crisis, how we have been able to, as an agency, contribute to national coordination or the health sector strengthening or inclusive sustainable economic matters. And then also we may be able to focus more attention on developing a national evaluation capacity and do some training materials and so forth. Carlos, do you want to come in?
Yeah, no, thank you, Fumika. Yes, indeed, and in the medium term, I mean, there are maybe a couple of other institutional and individual actions that we can take to better prepare ourselves. For instance, something that was mentioned in the previous slide by Fumika, we need to think about our capacities to make more use of remote sensing and other sources of big data. And something that we are actually doing right now also is improve our own skills and knowledge to work on remote. I mean, learn from others, but also take some time ourselves to learn about remote facilitation tools, surveys, and maybe other ways we can actually do teamwork. And this will be handy not just for this period, but also for the post-COVID world, which will be very different from the world we have now until now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Harold.
Thank you very much, Fumika, and thank you very much, Carlos. Indeed, there's many options coming, and we're discerning some paths to the adjustments we can do. I will ask Monica Sikosuka to join us for a few reflections. Monica is with the World Health Organization in Turkey. I will not put her on the spot to provide us all with individualized epidemiological forecasts, but rather to speak in brief to the remote data collection challenges and opportunities. I know that's an area that she has experience from in various past functions. Monica, are you with us?
Sure. Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be on this webinar, rather on short notice, but definitely a great pleasure to hear everybody else, how they're adjusting to the emergency situation and reworking around their evaluation plans and what's coming ahead and what it would look like post the COVID situation. I work with WHO right now, and our work at the moment, for instance, in Ankara, is that our data collection is pretty much not going to be affected because we are working a lot with administrative data. As you all know, health data is usually very well easy to access if you're working with facilities, and that makes it available in and out of times like this. But previously, I have worked in contexts where it was very difficult to access populations, and that was primarily in Somalia, with conflict happening, and it was very difficult to access programs, to be able to know what's happening, to verify their very existence, to know what kind of results they were attaining, to understand what kind of quality they were giving. And we had to be quite creative in ways of collecting data and being able to have data that supported the evaluations that we conducted. And I think a couple of speakers that I've had already have pointed some of those. Most of those were largely internet-based or methods. which rely heavily on having internet access. But in this day, quite a number of places have internet access, but also a good number may not have the access to internet, which becomes a challenge for collecting data. Of course, internet is related to all other more functions, whether it is using smartphones, whether it is using for scans of material. It is all very much hinged on how much you can be able to connect with the field. But just reflect on a couple of things that we've done, I've seen being done in the past. One was to use, mobile phones, smartphones to be able to collect data, whether it was voice messages, whether it was data itself that had in specific questions that were sent to a group of people, and they responded on their phones, and the data was being picked up and collected into a cloud somewhere and being analyzed. Smartphones also could be used to take pictures of locations of the people that we want to speak to and give you just an impression of what's happening in the field. Beyond using smartphones, we also used things like the old age photography, being able to get pictures of what you're looking for, because pictures can also tell you quite a lot. And then in other situations, we used scans. We were scanning material that was coming from the field. If you wanted like records, if you wanted checklists, if you wanted data that you would want to go back and analyze and be able to see whether it's telling you anything about how the program is doing. We did collect those. We asked our teams in the field to collect that kind of data, take pictures and scan some of the documents. And then most critical at the end of the day was to sit down and actually analyze or synthesize, make sense of what all this material was. And that was equivalent to doing a field visit, really, which is something that maybe an evaluator would want to do. The most important part being that there's got to be very clear definition of what kind of data you want, from who and how it should be provided, so that whoever is on the ground is able to provide that in that form that you needed, and then creating the time to sit down and actually analyze it and see whether it's fitting your evaluation questions. I must say that the limitations like we've already had, fast being connectivity like we had already. And there could be, of course, issues of reliability of the data, because you're asking yourselves, how reliable is this data? I'm asking people to send us, we're asking people to send scans and photographs and other material. They could be choosing and picking the best, which may be really quite biased. But again, we've got to be able to build trust with our teams in the country office or in the field to be able to say, what is the evaluation about? It's about our learning, it's about our common learning, and therefore let's try and reflect with a lot of meaning in terms of what we are putting on the table so that it helps us to do something better. Definitely all this would affect the quality of evaluations, but just to reemphasize the fact that we need to think about the must-do evaluations. Should we, in this time of a crisis, like someone said, that the COVID is affecting everybody, our national counterparts, our field teams, our stakeholders, our partners. So not everybody's out there walking about doing their routine work. So we must do what we think we must be done. And I think top it up, it would be to really, really emphasize why we have to do this evaluation, if we have to do it, emphasizing on the part of learning, so that there is a lot of trust and willingness to really participate in this. Otherwise, doing things when we do evaluations or collect data remotely, people, if it's a lot of, okay, what exactly are you doing? Yes, there's accountability. Then people want to give you what they think is the best. They give you which could only be a small portion of what they're going through. But if we build the concept of this is a learning exercise, it will help us to get better. That's the other bigger element of evaluations. Then I think it could motivate everyone to work together so that they are producing what can be reliable and what you can rely on as an evaluator to be able to make your conclusions. So I think really those are previous lessons I've learned in doing remote data collection. And I think the platforms, if they allow, if you have access to internet, if you can do Skype calls, because like we were doing a Skype call for an evaluation that was being done recently, we were meeting with evaluators via Skype. If that's possible, I think those are options that we can explore during this time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, and that's very helpful indeed. Now we have a few minutes this gets to be the tricky part, because I'm sure many people have reflections to share. I suggest more in the nature of reflections to share than detailed questions to individual speakers, in the sense that nobody, I think, comes here pretending that they have all the answers. Now, to facilitate exchange here, I'm going to need to ask participants to raise their hand by way of, under the participants banner at the bottom of your screen. If you press show hand, I should be able to see. And so whilst people ponder their, here's a hand. Let me see how many we have. Okay, so let me ask first Laurie Bell, then I have Amjad Alatar. Laurie, they're unmuted. Laurie, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for all of the good ideas. I actually postponed another meeting so I could stay on and gather some more tricks. I think one of the things that we're doing, and going back to the prioritize, replanning our work plan, is trying to see if we can, so we have evaluations that are already underway. So what do we do in that case? So I think you have to look at evaluations that haven't started yet or underway, or the ones that are finishing up. Ones that are finishing up, I think mostly we can finish them up and we can disseminate them using technology, webinars, etc. The ones that haven't started yet, we are, can we postpone them? How long will we have to postpone them? The really tricky ones are the ones that are actually underway. And so one of the things we've been discussing is, can we develop more products along the evaluation cycle so that everything doesn't depend on the final report at the very end of the process. In fact, can we distill out from the inception report, more of a desk review, something that is actually drawing some initial findings. So I think as we're looking at those evaluations that are already in the inception phase, already kicked off, teams are contracted. For those that we think we can still go forward to some extent with desk review and maybe limited web-based interviews, we're looking at creative solutions for creating those interim products. What we're seeing, and I think it's going to be temporary, but even when we're asking for, we have a couple of evaluations that really can be done by Skype, by remote interviews, but even when we're asking for remote interviews, we're getting pushback saying, come and see us in Q3, Q4. I think this is going to pass. I think this is a very difficult moment, the next couple of weeks, probably the whole month of April, where people, even though they're teleworking and theoretically supposed to be still working, they're really not able to work at full steam. Everyone is very distracted. But I think there will become a line where we have to say, the work does continue. We've been told to stand and deliver, and, especially when we're talking about emergency work, we can't not be delivering. So I think over the coming months, not all evaluations will be postponed, and we are prioritizing those that are urgent and important, as was recently said by someone else. On Guy's point on lists, I think that's an interesting one, is when you're going to do interviews remotely, you're very dependent on having good lists and having all the contacts for those list of stakeholders. Maybe thinking more about, I think UNICEF had an experiment last year with using more the push. So instead of soliciting, reaching out and interviewing specific stakeholders, using their U report to try to open up space for contributions. We haven't done that in UNHCR, but I think it's an interesting idea. And then finally, we are already getting clear signals that management will want an evaluation of the COVID response in UNHCR on two levels. One is looking internally at the way that we, in terms of managing staff health and well-being, while at the same time ensuring business continuity. That's definitely one question. Did we do the right thing? And then the second thing is still to be seen, but undoubtedly will be seen, is how did UNHCR respond to the COVID crisis in refugee and IDP settings. So I think there's a whole conversation there about how we manage those evaluations and what are the benchmarks, particularly when we look at internal performance of the agencies, what will be the benchmarks against which to measure that. Over.
Thank you very much, Laurie. I have Amjad Al-Attar. My apologies if I don't immediately recognize the agency with which you're affiliated. Please can you introduce yourself and provide your reflection. Thank you. Amjad?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I hope all is well and all is safe. My name is Amjad Al-Attar. I'm an evaluation officer at UNRWA. It's really my pleasure, to be part of this meeting in specific, where I know some of you very well. I hope we all can over and go through this coronavirus crisis soon. Well, out of this, I would like to thank the presenters and the speakers for this deep and insightful presentations and thoughts. And actually, I would like to share with you the importance out of these presentations. I believe that it's time to start focusing on data quality review as a function, as a standalone function, to really organize the data governance. Now we are facing difficult situations and tough situations, and I don't believe that we have the luxuriety of resources and the time even to just for the sake of learning. So in this regard, I would highly emphasize on the importance of the data quality, on the high quality data, and on how should programs and commissions assess the data quality for their interventions and for their programs, as well as the precise corrective actions that all organizations should take if they encounter data quality issues, because I don't believe that we can go back over and back and forth to the field to validate our data and to ensure their validity, their completeness, their accuracy, their verifiability and consistency. So this is from my side. Again, the DQR is really becoming an important tool to support the evaluation and to support the decision making within this turbulences that we are witnessing right now. Over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amjad. And we don't have a lot of more time. We will have to have later further sessions to give justice to the richness, I'm sure, of thoughts arising from the many colleagues participating. On the part of the organizers, we will be collating a little report. And let me also welcome any agencies and colleagues who have material that they are able to share. We will be able to then embed in our little mini report from this webinar. Before I pass over to Oscar, who as director of the UNDP IEO as of tomorrow, and with whom who's been directing our thoughts so far on this, I'll very briefly allow the opportunity back to the panelists if you have further thoughts arising. If you have any in brief, then Imran, Guy, Fumika, or Carlos, or Monica, if you have any brief thoughts, now feel free.
If I may, I wanted to give the floor to Indran first.
Come on, Guy, come on.
Okay, no, because I actually was quite impressed by the depth and analysis that has gone into this. But one thing that really worries me is when people are saying, well, we need to ask ourselves the question, are these evaluations serving a purpose? What is their use? For me, if a project is able to continue its activities, evaluation should as well. I just don't understand that we would be told by our colleagues, look, we can continue the project, but we cannot accommodate your evaluation. I think it's extremely important that we keep on stressing that evaluations are a very important part of the whole process of project implementation. And if we now back down on this and say, well, okay, we can postpone the evaluation or cancel it, that we run the risk that the evaluation culture that we have been building might be undermined, because people will just see evaluations as this kind of thing that you may want to do if you, it's a luxury. And I don't see it as a luxury. I think it's an essential part of the process. If activities continue, we should be able to do the evaluations as well, using, of course, methods that are safe and do not put anybody at risk. But we should not, I would say, let ourselves be pushed back on this and be very vigilant. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Imran, would you want to speak or?
Sure. No, totally agree with what Guy said. I mean, this has taken decades to build the evaluation culture. If you are going to start accommodating views that this is a crisis and evaluation is unimportant, you need to have a counteracting argument that evaluation is more important in a crisis in order to provide real-time information so that it is able to mitigate and navigate in that crisis. Point one. Point number two, when the crisis passes and there is going to be almost a scramble for resources across the UN system, the authentic documents that will justify the continuation of various UN programs is going to be independent evaluations. Right? Because there's a lot of skepticism around the self-reporting of the organizations. So if we can also start presenting that in this context, evaluations, what's been done and what needs to be done becomes even more important to demonstrate the value additionality, because there are going to be these pushes on that. So totally agree with colleagues.
Okay, now I have one question that's come in on the chat side. I will trust we allow a meeting to go for another few minutes. There's a question from Ekaterina Sediakina Riviere to evaluation heads of office. I'm not sure we're able to fully respond. What are your thoughts on criteria that can guide us whether to start a new evaluation or not, or to readjust scope or postpone, is the question. Well, I will put that question out there for, I think, Oscar to try and take on board as best he can. Let me emphasize again that we're fully aware of there being many questions arising, and we will need to have further opportunities to share our experience and to cement our response to this crisis and other crises that may come. And again, we will be compiling a small report to capture the overall thrust of the interventions and the discussions we've had. Oscar, are you there and ready for some kind of closing reflections?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for joining us. And thanks to the organizers for this very important and timely seminar and webinar. This crisis has affected and changed the way in which we operate, and therefore it's very timely. I agree with the importance of getting evidence to inform decision-making in times of crisis and reinforcing the role that evaluation can play. We will need, however, to readjust and be more flexible in terms of our planning. We will need to be creative in terms of trying to find solutions, because the challenges that will be faced by our member states are unprecedented. And therefore, in addition to the response to the crisis, it is important that we start thinking of the recovery from the crisis. And for the recovery, I am certain that evaluation can provide a wealth of well-thought evaluative evidence to inform decision-making as it becomes more needed. Of course, with the paramount concern of keeping our staff and consultants' safety as a priority, we will need to adjust the way in which we conduct evaluation, and there are opportunities to reflect about what is essential in the work that we are doing so that we can concentrate our focus on the analysis of what is essential. Before closing, I really would like to take the opportunity to thank Indra Naidu for his stellar leadership of UNDP Independent Office of Evaluation. He is a stallion of independence in the UN system and has been known for that and for the rigor of the quality of the work that he has led and the work of his team. I am really honored and privileged to try to follow these big shoes, but I do my best to try to fill those. In any case, Indran, you will be always a very esteemed member of this community, and I know that this is not a goodbye, but just a see you later. And in that sense, let me again express the appreciation from a UNEG perspective to all the contributions that you have done throughout this last 8 years to the UNEG community to have a more robust and credible evaluation system that dares to speak truth to power and shows its relevance in normal times, but also in crisis times. Thank you, Ariel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for those thoughts. There are many more reflections. I'm sure that there are some on the chat side here. We're compiling those. And so thanks for those that are linking us to additional resources. I see one to J-POW coming up from Mona Fatou, UNICEF. But any other suggestions for material you think we should put into the pot of a little report from this event? Let me then lastly thank you all for participating. I'm sure there's going to be further opportunities. Let me also add my voice to special thanks to Imran for the time of his leadership at IEO and for the inspiration that he has and leadership that he has brought to the UNDP's evaluation function during this time. With those words then, thank you to everybody for participating, and a wave to all, and special wave, two-hand wave to Indran, and
thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we shall.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it, all the best, thank you.